You ever notice how some people only smile with their teeth, not their eyes? That's how it started. With Rachel Holbrook's perfect little teeth and eyes as cold as stained glass in January. She said it like it was nothing. Maybe it's time we bring in someone younger, someone who knows Google Docs, just like that, in front of the other church staff. She didn't even look at me when she said it. Just sipped her lemon water, tapping those acrylics on her Yeti tumbler like a countdown. And I didn't say a word. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew how this town worked. You keep your head down. You don't make trouble. Especially if you're a woman of a certain age and you've outlived your usefulness in people's eyes. The meeting ended with a prayer. I bowed my head like I always did, but I didn't say amen. Not this time. I'd worked at First Hope Baptist for 26 years. Longer than Rachel's been married to Jim. Longer than Jim's been the pastor. Longer than Google Docs has existed if we're being technical. But none of that mattered. Not anymore. See, I came with the building. I knew every broken lock, every humming light bulb in that office wing, every drawer that stuck if you pulled it wrong. But people forget things. Especially when they think they're moving up in the world. And Rachel Holbrook, she fancied herself royalty now. Ever since Jim's sermons went viral on Facebook and someone from a podcast in Nashville called him the small-town shepherd with a megachurch mindset, it got to them. Suddenly, the newsletter had to be rebranded, the food pantry renamed, and my desk reassigned to the youth intern. Rachel started calling me Miss Marilyn in that sing-song voice, like I was her preschooler's babysitter. I wasn't surprised when the rumors started. She's tired. She forgets things. She's holding us back. But what stung wasn't the lies, it was who stayed quiet. The deacons. The women from the prayer circle. The pastor's assistant who used to hug me on Sundays. Even Connie from the choir, the one whose wedding bulletins I printed by hand. They all just faded back. No one ever says it out loud, but there's a quiet cruelty in small churches when they decide you're done. Now let me tell you something most folks don't know about me. I wasn't always a secretary. Back before Paul died, we ran Carter & Sons Automotive. He did the wrenching, I did the books. I know how to track inventory and audit a ledger blindfolded. But nobody at church ever asked about that. They just saw the woman in orthopedic shoes who made coffee and typed up potluck signups. So when Rachel started pushing for modernization, I saw exactly what was happening. She wanted to make space. Not for someone better, just someone more useful. It was a Tuesday morning when I noticed something odd. A transfer request on the church credit card, new catering services for staff luncheons. $437.88 from the Community Outreach Fund. Now, I'm not one to gossip, but I also don't ignore red flags. I printed a copy and put it in the locked cabinet behind my desk. The one only I had the key to. The one nobody thought mattered. That cabinet held 20 years of records. Checks, emails, meeting notes. It also held a letter from Pastor Harold, the man before Jim, who warned the board in 808 about increasingly ambitious behavior. Funny how people forget, but I didn't. Later that week, Rachel swung by my desk with a forced smile and a glossy flyer for an upcoming women's leadership retreat. Wouldn't this be a good time for you to take a little break, Miss Marilyn? You've earned it. Break. That's code for get out of the way. I folded the flyer in half and handed it back. I'll be here, like always. Her lips thinned into something almost polite. But her eyes said, we'll see about that. That night, I went home and did something I hadn't done in a long while. I pulled out the little fireproof box from the hall closet, the one Paul insisted we buy after the tornado scare. Inside was everything our will the house deed, a photo of Paul in his army uniform, and a flash drive I'd been updating quietly every few months. Every document I'd saved from the church. Every discrepancy. Every accidental transfer. Every copy of Rachel's emails signed on Pastor Jim's behalf. I wasn't planning anything. Not yet. But I was done pretending not to see. The only person who seemed to notice I was unraveling a little was Noah, the new custodian. Soft-spoken guy. Maybe late 30s. Worked like he had something to prove, always wore long sleeves even in August. We crossed paths one evening when I stayed late. He saw me at the copier and said, "You okay, Miss Marilyn?" I nodded, then paused. "You ever get the feeling someone's trying to erase you?" He looked up, really looked, and said, "All the time." We didn't say much more, but the next day he left a cup of black coffee on my desk without a word. No note, no smile, just solidarity. Sometimes that's enough to keep you steady. 3 weeks later, the shoe dropped. Pastor Jim called me into his office on a Friday. The air smelled like cologne and freshly printed sermons. Rachel was there too, of course. He clasped his hands together like he was delivering bad news at a funeral. "We've been praying about this, Marilyn. We think it's time you step into a season of rest." Season of rest. Another coded phrase. Another smile that didn't touch the eyes. My hands stayed folded in my lap, but inside, I felt the first flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Rage. Not the screaming kind. The quiet kind. The kind that hums low like a storm building just past the horizon. I didn't argue, didn't cry. I just nodded and said, "If that's what you think is best." But when I left that office, I didn't go home. I went straight to the cabinet, and for the first time in 20 years, I unlocked it. Stick around for the rest of this story, because what comes next? Well, let's just say Rachel and Pastor Jim thought they were cleaning house. But I was about to clean them out. Let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story reaches, because women like Marilyn, we're everywhere. And we're done being erased. Let me tell you something about small-town churches. They don't fire you. They bless you into your next season. It sounds sweet, holy even, but it feels like death by 1,000 kindnesses. After that Friday meeting with Pastor Jim and Rachel, I wasn't officially let go. No termination letter, no severance, no announcement, just silence. The next Sunday, I showed up in my usual pew third row from the back, right under the squeaky ceiling fan, and my name wasn't on the bulletin. Rachel had printed a new version of the weekly schedule. Glossy, color-coded. My duties vanished, like I'd never been there. Nobody said a word about it, not out loud, but I saw the way they looked at me. Smiling too hard. Hugging just a little tighter, like they'd been told to make sure Marilyn feels supported. Support. That's another church word that doesn't mean what it says. So I did what I've always done. I got quiet and I got to work. Every night that week, I stayed late at the church under the excuse of organizing old files for the archive. But I wasn't organizing. I was digging. That locked cabinet in my old office, it became my war chest. Bank statements, vendor invoices, catering orders billed twice. I even found an email from Rachel to a contractor thanking him for bending the invoice numbers. They weren't just pushing me out. They were lining their pockets on the way. What broke my heart most wasn't the money. It was the betrayal. This church, it was where Paul and I renewed our vows after his first chemo. It was where I'd comforted widows, written sympathy cards, folded bulletins, while listening to teenagers cry in the hallway over breakups. This place had been my sanctuary, and now it was being turned into somebody's launch pad. Pastor Jim had plans, big ones. He was talking expansion, new campuses, a podcast studio behind the choir room. Rachel wanted to be a speaker. Young women in faith, bold, blessed, and branded. She was already pitching a book to a Christian influencer agency in Texas. That's what all this was about. They didn't see me as part of the future. I was the wallpaper, something to peel off before the house got staged for sale. The only one who treated me like I was still real was Noah. He kept showing up always after hours, said he liked the quiet. One night, he caught me cross-referencing spreadsheets in the fellowship hall. "You do this for fun?" he asked. I looked up, eyes blurry from 2 hours of budget columns. "No, I do this for proof." He nodded once and said, "I know what that feels like." Turns out, Noah had been pushed out too once. He used to work maintenance at the high school 2 towns over. Laid off without warning after he reported a gym coach for cussing out a disabled student. They called it a restructure, he said. Said the budget was tight. Then 2 weeks later, they hired the principal's nephew. We sat there a while in silence, just listening to the vending machine hum. Then he pulled out an old flash drive from his backpack. "I don't know if it helps," he said, "but I've been tracking a few things too." Inside that flash drive, photos of expensive floral arrangements dumped in the trash after the Holbrook's women's brunch, invoices that didn't match receipts, a credit card charge for a weekend spa in Asheville that Rachel had claimed was a board retreat. He wasn't just a janitor. He was watching everything. We didn't make a plan. Not exactly. It wasn't like in the movies where two underdogs start plotting revenge over coffee. It was quieter, slower. We just kept collecting. Noah started checking security footage. I filed everything into a binder I kept in my trunk. Every time I uncovered something new, I'd whisper, "That's another stone." Paul used to say that when we'd fix up old engines together. Every lie you pull out of a machine is one less stone in the shoe, Marilyn. Then came the prayer meeting. Wednesday night. Fellowship Hall. Usually 10 or 12 people. That night, 20 showed up. Rachel walked in wearing a tailored blazer and holding a clipboard. She stood at the front and said, "The board has asked me to lead this session in Pastor Jim's absence." Then she opened with, "Let's pray over the changing season of our church. Let's ask God to remove anything that hinders growth." Every head bowed. Mine stayed up. She wasn't talking to God. She was talking to me. I knew right then, next Sunday, she'd make it official. Probably a sweet little send-off with flowers and a slideshow. She'd hug me on stage, thank me for my decades of service, and wave goodbye. The congregation would cry. I'd cry. And they'd keep the money, and the power, and the lie. But see, I had one thing Rachel didn't. I had history, and the receipts. That Friday, I went to the town library and printed everything, not just the transactions, but a letter I'd found tucked in the back of the filing cabinet. From Pastor Harold, written before he retired. It warned the board against appointing Jim Holbrook. Said he was too slick with numbers, too rehearsed with his apologies. It's charisma without conscience, the letter read. And that's dangerous in ministry. I put the letter on top of the stack. That night, I told Noah Sunday's the day. He didn't ask what I meant. Just nodded and said, "You want me in the room? I want you next to me." I spent Saturday alone. I pulled Paul's old suit jacket from the closet, the one I'd worn to his funeral. I sat with it for a long time, felt the weight of it across my lap. Then I opened my Bible and found the note Paul had left me years ago. Tucked in Proverbs, right at chapter 31, it said, "She is clothed in strength and dignity, and she laughs without fear of the future." That's you. And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. Sunday morning, I got up before the sun, made my coffee, buttoned that jacket, and slid the binder under my arm like a shield. Because when you're walking into war with the truth, you don't need a sword, just courage, and maybe a good man holding the back door open. Stick around, because what happened next, it didn't just change the church. It changed everything. Drop a comment if this part hit close to home, or if you've ever had to gather stones quietly waiting for the day they'd matter. The reveal's coming in Act 3, The Breaking Point. And trust me, you'll want to be there when the doors finally open. You ever have a moment where everything slows down? Like your body's still, but inside you're standing at the edge of something? And you know, once you take that step, nothing's going back to how it was. That was me. Sunday morning, binder in hand, keys to a truth nobody wanted opened. I stood on the church steps in Paul's jacket, watching the congregation filter in same handshakes, same hairsprayed hugs, same fake smile welcomes that I used to think were real. And for a second, I almost turned around, almost told myself it wasn't worth it. But then I saw Rachel at the front entrance, clipboard in one hand, coffee in the other, laughing like she'd already won. Like my disappearance had already been written, printed, and filed under God's will. And that's when the shaking in my hands stopped. Because I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about everyone like me who'd been erased. Smiled out the door with a Bible verse and a casserole. The service started normal. Well, church normal. You know the kind of performance where people sing about grace while thinking about real estate. Jim took the stage in his polished shoes and rolled up sleeves. He was good. I'll give him that. He knew how to make we sound like you and prayer sound like power. Right before the final hymn, he asked for a moment of silence. I'd like to take a few minutes, he said, to acknowledge someone who has served this church for decades. And my stomach dropped, because I knew exactly what was coming. I was about to be publicly retired without permission. Miss Marilyn Carter. He continued motioning for me to stand, has graciously accepted our offer to begin a season of rest and renewal. Graciously. I stood, binder tucked tight under my arm, and walked down the aisle. I didn't look at Rachel, but I could feel the heat coming off her like a gas stove turned high. She hadn't expected me to stand. Not like this. Not with a binder. I stepped up to the pulpit, turned to the congregation, and I smiled. Not the kind they teach in Southern hospitality. The kind that comes when you've got facts, receipts, and no more fear. I didn't graciously accept anything I said calm as a January morning. And just like that silence, even the children in the back went quiet. I wasn't asked to rest. I was pushed out, silently, strategically. And now you're being fed a story with Bible verses on top. A few people shifted in their pews, but most still frozen. I've worked here for 26 years, seen 5 pastors come and go, buried more members than I can count, printed bulletins by hand when the copier broke, held secrets for this church I'll take to my grave. I held up the binder. But some things, they don't deserve to be buried. I opened to the first page, a printout of the spa charges from Rachel's leadership retreat, then catering receipts billed twice, payments from the community fund that led straight to her brother-in-law's business. No reaction yet. So I flipped the page again and read aloud from Pastor Harold's letter. I worry about Jim Holbrook. His charisma masks a hunger for control. He smooths over conflict with language, but beneath it is a disregard for accountability. Dead air. Rachel's face was white. Jim cleared his throat and stepped forward, arms raised slightly. Marilyn, we can talk about this. No, you talked around me for months. Now you'll listen. I kept reading. 3 pages. Facts, numbers, names. No accusations, just documentation. When I finally stopped, the room stayed silent. Until someone in the 3rd row stood up. Old Mr. Chambers, mid-80s, former board treasurer. Walks with a cane and sees through everything. He turned to the crowd and said, if even half of what she's showing is real, the board needs to be investigating, not applauding. That broke it open. Voices started bubbling up. A few women from the prayer team came over to me. One of them, Georgia, put a hand on my shoulder. I didn't know, she whispered, and I believed her. Because Rachel's power didn't come from being loud. It came from being subtle. From making you feel like standing against her was the same as standing against God. But now, the spell was broken. I walked out of that sanctuary not as someone dismissed, but someone defended. And standing outside, waiting near the ramp with that quiet strength of his, was Noah. He gave me a single nod, then handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a printed photo, one I hadn't seen before. Rachel and Jim at a resort, holding cocktails. Date stamped. Same weekend they claimed to be leading the youth retreat. Security footage pulled from the contractor's public promo video, Noah said, posted on their Instagram. I smiled so wide it hurt. You were right, I told him. He raised a brow. You said proof doesn't need noise, just timing. That afternoon, I didn't go home. I drove straight to Miss Carroll's house. She's 73, head of the women's board, and doesn't suffer fools. She poured me sweet tea and said, tell me everything. From the start. I did. And before I left, she handed me a folder of her own. Copies of budget requests that had been denied without explanation. Donation checks that never made it to the pantry. Thought I was just forgetful, she said. Turns out I was just too trusting. That Monday, the board called an emergency meeting. By Tuesday, Rachel had stepped away for personal reasons. By Friday, Jim was on sabbatical to reflect and recalibrate his calling. But I didn't celebrate. Because this wasn't about punishment. It was about restoring something that had been quietly rotting. The church didn't need revenge. It needed truth, and someone to finally say it out loud. You know what surprised me most? The people who showed up afterward. Young women, retired teachers, a divorced mom who'd left the church years ago because she never felt holy enough. They stopped me in the grocery store, on my front porch, even in line at the DMV. And they all said the same thing. I saw what you did. I didn't know we were allowed to do that. Stick around, because Act 4, that's when the rebuilding starts. And not everyone's happy about it. Drop a comment if you've ever stood up when you were supposed to sit down, and let me know where you're watching from. These stories, they go further than we think. You ever notice how quiet things get after a storm? Not just outside, I mean, in people. After that Sunday, it was like someone unplugged the whole town. No calls from Rachel, no misunderstood text from Jim. Not even one of those church-wide "let's move on in love" emails they usually blast out after scandal. Just silence. And that silence told me everything. Because when people don't know how to apologize, they just disappear. Monday morning, I showed up to the church like I always did. Same parking spot, same key in the lock, same coffee pot gurgling in the kitchen. Except now, half the staff wouldn't meet my eyes. The new receptionist, young girl named Bree, stood up as I walked in and stammered something about waiting on board guidance. I smiled and told her to sit, because I wasn't there to reclaim my desk. I'd already packed up my things weeks ago, emotionally at least. No, I was there to return the key and leave on my own terms. That's a different kind of leaving, let me tell you. When they push you out, they think they own the goodbye. But when you walk out on your own, chin-high binder closed, it shakes something in them. The board offered to reinstate me. Miss Carroll called personally. Said they'd voted. Said the congregation needed healing and that I could help bring that. I thanked her. Told her I appreciated the offer. But the truth, I wasn't going back. Because I realized something in that pulpit. You can't rebuild in a house that still smells like smoke. And I wasn't going to scrub the walls for people who lit the match and walked away. You want to know the twist? Rachel didn't disappear. She pivoted. Within 2 weeks, she'd started a podcast. Flawed, but called about recovering from spiritual betrayal. I nearly choked on my oatmeal when Noah showed me the trailer. There she was, camera angled high, soft piano music in the background, talking about how hurt people, and how healing begins when we release bitterness. Bitterness. That's what they always call it when a woman tells the truth out loud. It wasn't an apology. It was a rebrand. And I knew better than to engage, because women like Rachel, they don't admit fault. They just change outfits and keep talking. Meanwhile, I started getting letters, handwritten ones, from people who'd left the church years ago. Women who'd felt invisible. Mothers whose kids were told not to ask too many hard questions. One of them, Gloria, had moved away to Charlotte. Said she'd cried watching the clip online. Said, for the first time, I felt like someone stood up for me too. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about just my story anymore. It was about every woman who stayed quiet in a meeting. Every volunteer who got thanked on stage, but dismissed behind closed doors. It was about legacy. And what we leave behind when we stop shrinking to fit people's comfort zones. Noah, bless him, started checking in more often. Sometimes bringing flowers from the farmer's market. Sometimes just mowing the front lawn without asking. One afternoon, he dropped off a stack of used books. Said they were from his mom's old teaching days. Said, maybe you can do something with these. That's when the idea started. The church might not need a secretary anymore, but this town, it needed a space for women to regroup, to rebuild, to breathe. So I rented out the old community hall on Juniper Street next to the thrift shop where everyone goes but pretends not to. Painted the walls myself. Brought in folding chairs. Hung up my mama's quilt on the back wall. And I called it the Lantern Room. Because sometimes when you're walking out of something dark, you don't need a spotlight. You just need a small, steady light to show the next step. The first week, 5 women showed up. Week 2, 11. By week 5, we had women from the next county asking to join. Some were pastors' wives. Some were single moms. One was a woman who used to clean the church restrooms, but said nobody ever asked her name. We didn't preach. We didn't gossip. We just sat and told the truth. And that space, those mismatched chairs and donated muffins, became more sacred than any sanctuary I'd ever sat in. Funny thing, a few people from the old church started popping in. At first, I thought they were just curious, but then they started staying. And one by one, they began opening up. Turns out the betrayal didn't just hurt me. It rattled everyone who had believed in the version of church that put image above integrity. People had questions, and the Lantern Room became a place where we asked them without being shamed for it. One afternoon, Bree, the receptionist, who'd looked so nervous when I walked in that Monday, showed up after hours, said she was thinking about quitting, said she'd seen the way Rachel talked about me in staff meetings, called me resentful, said I was stuck in the past. I didn't agree with it, Bree whispered. But I didn't say anything either, and I should have. I took her hand and said the words I wish someone had said to me months earlier. You were trying to survive. That's not the same as betrayal. We hugged. And right there in that hall, I let go of the last piece of bitterness still lodged in my chest. Because Bree didn't owe me anything, but she gave me something real. And that's all any of us ever want. I didn't burn bridges, but I built a new road. And when people ask if I ever think about going back, I say no. Because home isn't always where you started. Sometimes it's where you finally get to stop pretending. Stick around for Act 5. Because the legacy, it's not just what we leave behind. It's who we become when nobody's watching anymore. And if this part meant something to you, leave a comment. Let me know where you're listening from. Because stories like this, they don't just stay local. They travel, they grow, just like we do. I always thought legacy was something you left in a will. Land, a little money, a box of jewelry nobody wears, but keeps out of guilt. But now I know better. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what keeps going after you stop trying to explain yourself. It's the women sitting in the Lantern Room on a Thursday night, folding programs for someone else's baby shower. Not because they're obligated, but because they want to. It's a voicemail from a teenage girl named Ellie, who says, Miss Marilyn, I heard what you said that Sunday. I think I want to go to seminary. It's Bree, the receptionist, now leading her own women's budgeting group, using the exact spreadsheet I taught her in a quiet corner of the church copy room. That's legacy. Not revenge. Not applause. Just impact. That lives on. 3 months after everything settled, I got a call from Pastor Jim. I didn't answer it, but he left a voicemail, said he was in a place of reflection, said he was working through things. He ended with, I hope you can forgive me. I didn't know how much I was hurting you. I sat with that message for a long time, played it 3 times, and here's the truth. I do believe he didn't know, because Jim never cared enough to look. He was so busy building his image, he stopped noticing the damage it left behind. And Rachel, she hasn't called. But I heard through Sharon, the florist, not the gossip. Let's be clear that Rachel had pitched a women's leadership book to a publisher in Atlanta. Title, Leading Through Grace. I nearly dropped my gardening shears when I heard it. But then I laughed. Not because it's funny, but because some people will always dress manipulation in scripture. And I don't need to fight that. I don't need to correct it or expose it. Because Rachel's real legacy, it's not her Instagram quotes. It's not her podcast sponsors. It's the room she walked into every week and made smaller. For everyone but herself. People remember that, whether they say it or not. And eventually, that kind of power stops working. A few weeks ago, I was at the hardware store picking up mulch. Yes, I do my own landscaping now. Paul would have grumbled about it. That's what grandsons are for. Well, Paul, I don't have grandsons. I've got arthritis and a stubborn streak. Anyway, I was in line behind a woman I didn't recognize. Maybe mid-30s baby on her hip toddler pulling on her shirt. She kept glancing over at me. Finally, she said, Excuse me, are you? Marilyn Carter. I braced myself. Didn't know if it was about the church or the Lantern Room, or maybe just mistaking me for someone else. But then she said, My mom used to talk about you. Said you were the reason she kept going to Bible study even after she stopped going to church. She smiled, tired, but real. She died last year, breast cancer. But she always said you made her feel like she mattered. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. And in that moment, I felt something bigger than pride. I felt peace, because we don't always get to see the ripples of what we do. But they're there. They are there. The lantern room's doing fine. Better than fine. We outgrew the little space behind the thrift shop. Now we've got a lease on the old Davis building, the one that used to be a bakery before it closed in '08. Funny how places full of sweetness always come back around. We don't call it a ministry. We don't have bylaws or committees. But we've got women learning job skills. We've got a retired therapist doing free grief support. We've got kids painting murals and teenagers helping teach tech to older women. And on the door, there's a plaque. Simple. It reads, "You are not too much. You are not too late." That's it. But it's enough. Noah, he still shows up. Never all at once. Never overstepping. But he's there when we need him. He built shelves in the back room. Fixed the thermostat last winter. Painted the exterior with a group of veterans who now meet there every other Tuesday. He and we don't label whatever this is. We don't need to. But sometimes when the day winds down and the chairs are stacked, he stays a little longer, sits next to me on the back steps, and we don't talk. We just are. And sometimes that's more than enough. Looking back, I know now why Rachel really came after me. It wasn't because I was incompetent. It wasn't even about the job. It's because I saw her, and people like her, they don't like being seen without their script. She built her whole persona on image polished perfect, always smiling. And I was a mirror she couldn't control. That scared her. So she did what insecure people always do, tried to replace the truth with something prettier. And when that didn't work, she turned on the mirror. But the thing about mirrors, they reflect. And when you try to smash one, you only see yourself in sharper pieces. You want the real ending. Here it is. I don't miss the church office. I don't miss the bulletin deadlines or the fake smiles or the careful politics of prayer circles. What I do miss, the quiet moments, the real ones, like holding the hand of a woman whose grief had no words, like slipping gas cards into envelopes without a return name, like watching someone find their voice after years of thinking they weren't allowed to speak. Those moments didn't need a building. They just needed a safe space and someone willing to stay. That's what I've built now. Not a career, not a title. A life. Rooted in truth, watered with pain. And now it's blooming. If this story has followed you home, if you've seen pieces of yourself in Maryland, leave a comment. Let me know where you're listening from. Because you never know who might need your story too. And you're not too much. You're not too late. You're exactly on time.